Lieutenant Commander Ava Callahan stepped off the transport plane onto the sun-baked tarmac of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado with a measured calm that belied the storm of tension coiling inside her. The salty air hit her first, sharp and familiar, carrying the faint scent of diesel, seaweed, and the constant hum of military life. This wasn't her first visit, far from it. Years ago, she had walked these same paths during the SEAL pipeline, running in the pre-dawn fog with a mix of exhilaration and fear. But then, bureaucracy had forced her out, despite her unmatched skill and unbroken determination. Now, she was back, officially, strategically, and more importantly, unyielding. The base bustled with its usual energy, SEALs sprinting through obstacle courses, instructors shouting commands, helicopters whining overhead, and armored vehicles rolling past. Ava adjusted the strap of her duffel bag and kept her gaze forward. She wasn't here to be noticed. She was here to assert her authority without the theatrics. But even in her understated approach, the world seemed to notice anyway. Heads turned, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed doubt. A woman in a high-ranking position on a SEAL base was still rare, even in 2025. Colonel Richard Harland watched from the command office as Ava approached. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of rigid presence that made new arrivals flinch. His piercing blue eyes tracked her every step like a predator evaluating prey. He didn't like her already. In his decades of command, he had seen enough ambitious officers, most of them men, and he had learned to crush the ones who challenged his authority. Ava's quiet confidence, the almost imperceptible rhythm of her stride, irritated him. She didn't fumble, she didn't hesitate, and worst of all, she didn't defer. Ava reported to Chief Miller, the senior enlisted officer in her department, who greeted her with a tight-lipped smile. Miller was a veteran of countless operations, his face a map of battles fought in distant deserts and oceans. He respected skill and discipline above all else, and he recognized that Ava possessed both in abundance. "Welcome back, Lieutenant Commander," he said quietly, leading her through a maze of barracks, gyms, and hangars. "You'll find things have changed, and some things never do." They entered the operations office, a large, windowed space buzzing with low-level chatter and the soft clacking of keyboards. Ava's eyes scanned the room with the precision of a trained operative. Systems were in place, but inefficiencies were visible to someone who knew where to look. Misplaced logs, gaps in security protocols, even small errors in the supply manifests. She filed the observations silently. Every detail mattered, and every detail could save or endanger lives. "Lieutenant Commander Callahan," a voice cut through the office, sharp, commanding, edged with barely hidden disdain. Ava turned to see Colonel Harland stepping forward, his hands clasped behind his back. His posture was perfect, his uniform immaculate, but there was something in the set of his jaw, the narrowness of his eyes, that screamed territorial threat. "I hear we have an addition to the command team," he said slowly, his gaze appraising her as if she were a puzzle piece that didn't belong. Ava extended her hand with a professional smile. "Sir, I'm here to ensure operational efficiency and integrity, nothing more, nothing less." Her voice was calm, steady, and confident, a tone that didn't plead, didn't apologize, and didn't shrink. Harlan's jaw tightened. She didn't tremble. She didn't look away. The air between them crackled with silent tension. Miller cleared his throat. "Colonel, perhaps we should brief Lieutenant Commander Callahan on current operations," he said, though even his voice carried the undercurrent of caution. Harlan gave a curt nod and gestured toward the operations board. Ava followed without hesitation. The briefing began, but Harlan's interruptions were subtle but pointed. "We've always handled this section differently," he said, his tone implying that her methods were unnecessary. You may want to take note. Experience counts for more than theory here. Ava listened carefully, noting the pride and ego in his words, but she didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she made mental notes. Every overreach, every inefficiency, every opportunity for reform. As the day wore on, Ava walked the training grounds, observing SEALs running through their paces. Men and women alike, their bodies honed to perfection, moved with lethal precision. She nodded subtly at a few operators she recognized from her past training, men who had once doubted her, and now looked at her with cautious curiosity. There was no room for weakness here, but there was also no room for fear disguised as authority. Ava understood both truths intimately. By late afternoon, she encountered Harlan again. This time, the tension was palpable. "I don't like surprises," he said, his voice low and menacing. "And I don't like insubordination." Ava met his gaze evenly. "I don't intend to be either, sir. I intend to ensure the mission succeeds, whatever the cost." A flicker of surprise crossed his face. Few dared speak to him this way. Even fewer lived to do so without consequence. The day ended with Ava in her quarters, unpacking her gear, reviewing operational logs, and preparing mentally for the weeks ahead. She knew the real battle had already begun, not in the field, not in training exercises, but within the walls of command. Harlan's pride would not yield easily, and the SEAL culture, revered for courage, could also be unforgiving toward outsiders. But Ava had learned long ago that true strength didn't bow to intimidation. It faced it, head-on, without hesitation. As night fell over Coronado, the lights of the base flickered across the water. Helicopters whirred in the distance. Somewhere, SEALs ran drills in the fog, unaware that a storm of authority, courage, and principle had just returned to their ranks. Ava gazed out at the Pacific horizon, a silent promise forming in her mind. She would not just survive this environment, she would command it, and she would do it on her terms. Unseen by her, Harlan watched from his office window, a shadow of anger crossing his features. He underestimated her once. He would not again. The stage was set, the battle lines drawn, and somewhere deep inside, every SEAL would soon learn that Ava Callahan was not a challenge to be ignored. She was a force to be reckoned with. The morning sun had barely kissed the tarmac when Lieutenant Commander Ava Callahan returned to the operations office, her mind still replaying the subtle tension with Colonel Harlan from the day before. She knew that commanding respect in a world dominated by pride, reputation, and silent hierarchies was not something granted. It had to be earned, often the hard way. And Ava was ready. Her first hours were spent reviewing operational reports, noticing errors no one else had seen. Supplies meant for critical training missions were misallocated. Personnel logs didn't match actual deployments. Certain SEAL teams were underutilized, despite skill sets that could be deployed in covert exercises. For most, these were minor inefficiencies, footnotes in daily routines, but for Ava, they were potential risks that could cost lives. She called in Chief Miller for a private review. "Sir, the logistics chain has gaps. Some of these errors may look minor, but they could cripple mission readiness," she said. Miller nodded, impressed by her analytical precision. "You're seeing what most officers miss," he said quietly. "Be careful, though. Harlan doesn't like being questioned." By mid-morning, Harlan made his presence known. He walked in, towering over the table, eyes narrowed, projecting the kind of authority that demanded obedience. "I hear we have an officer making waves in my command," he said, his tone sharp. Ava met his gaze evenly. "I'm here to ensure Operation succeeds, sir," she replied, carefully measured. Nothing more, nothing less. The first clash came during a strategy meeting. Harlan's team was discussing a supply drop for a simulated night operation. Ava noticed a discrepancy in the load manifest. "Sir, the weight distribution is off," she pointed out. "The heavier equipment should be deployed first to prevent imbalance during landing." Harlan bristled. "I've been running these operations for decades. We know how to manage a payload." Ava held her ground. "With respect, Colonel, current protocols could compromise safety and timing. Adjusting the sequence will reduce risk and increase mission efficiency." The room went silent. Even seasoned SEALs, trained to face danger, flinched slightly at the tension crackling between these two officers. Harlan's lips tightened, a subtle twitch revealing his irritation. Throughout the day, the clashes continued. Harlan assigned tasks publicly in ways designed to undermine Ava's authority. Yet she responded calmly, each answer precise and unflappable. When he criticized her for allegedly overstepping boundaries, she replied without hesitation, "I'm executing my duties as assigned, sir. I ensure nothing jeopardizes the mission." It was a line that echoed with quiet defiance, and even the toughest operators noticed the strength in her voice. In the gym, the SEALs trained relentlessly. Ava walked among them, observing, taking mental notes. A group of men attempted to belittle her by challenging her tactical knowledge, but she answered each query with clarity and authority that left them speechless. "She's not here to impress," one whispered to a colleague. "She's here to see if we can handle the truth." Harlan, meanwhile, was growing more frustrated. Each challenge Ava presented wasn't just logical. It was unavoidable. Her calm, unwavering confidence was undermining his attempts at intimidation. He resorted to private meetings and curt memos, trying to assert control through bureaucracy rather than argument. But Ava's meticulous documentation and her calm reasoning left him no room to maneuver. Tensions reached a boiling point during a late afternoon briefing. Harlan slammed his fist on the table, his face flushed with fury. "Do you think you're smarter than everyone else here?" he barked, the sound echoing through the room. Ava, seated calmly, met his gaze without flinching. "No, sir," she said evenly. "I simply value accuracy and the lives of those under our command." The silence afterward was almost deafening. Operators shifted in their seats, their eyes darting between Ava and Harlan. Some felt relief that someone was finally holding the colonel accountable. Others feared the repercussions of witnessing dissent. Ava could feel the weight of their scrutiny, yet she remained composed. She knew that leadership wasn't about yelling or intimidation. It was about presence, principle, and the courage to speak when it mattered most. By evening, Ava returned to her quarters, her mind running through every interaction, every micro-expression, every tactical error she had spotted. She knew the next few weeks would be a test of endurance, patience, and nerve. Harlan would try to undermine her at every turn. He would push boundaries and attempt to humiliate her publicly. And she would have to respond in ways that were decisive yet strategically impeccable. Anything less could be exploited against her. Chief Miller found her later that night in the quiet operations room, reviewing data alone. "Ava," he said softly, "Harlan isn't going to change easily. He's used to bending everyone to his will. But you make him think twice." She nodded. "I'm not here to fight him directly. I'm here to make the SEALs safer, more effective. If he stands in the way of that, he becomes irrelevant." Miller smiled faintly, admiration in his eyes. "Just be careful. He's dangerous when cornered." Even outside the office, the tension was palpable. During a routine inspection of the docks, Harlan cornered Ava near a line of helicopters. "You're treading on thin ice," he warned, his voice low, almost a growl. "Do not forget who commands this base." Ava looked him in the eyes, unafraid. "I won't forget, sir. But I also won't compromise my duty for fear of a title." That night, as the base lights dimmed and the hum of generators filled the air, Ava stood by the perimeter fence, staring at the Pacific horizon. The waves crashed against the shore, relentless and indifferent. It reminded her of herself, unyielding, patient, but powerful when the moment demanded. Somewhere in the corridors of power, Harland was planning his next move, and Ava was preparing hers. She knew the first real confrontation was coming, a clash not of weapons or tactics, but of pride, authority, and moral resolve. One wrong move from him, and the base could witness a scandal. One misstep from her, and careers, hers included, could be destroyed. But Ava had survived worse than arrogance and anger. She had trained herself to remain calm in chaos, to act decisively when others hesitated, and to turn the tables when everyone thought she was outmatched. As she finally closed her eyes in the small confines of her quarters, she whispered to herself a simple mantra: strength is not demanded. Strength is demonstrated, and they will all see it soon. The base had yet to realize it, but the arrival of Ava Callahan marked the beginning of a storm, one that would challenge egos, expose corruption, and redefine respect in the most elite ranks of the Navy. The sun was low over Coronado, casting long shadows across the tarmac as Lieutenant Commander Ava Callahan walked briskly toward the hangar. She had spent the morning reviewing training schedules, equipment manifests, and personnel logs. Her mind, always a step ahead, was piecing together inconsistencies she had quietly noted over the past week. Each minor error, each subtle manipulation, hinted at a deeper problem. Colonel Harland was not just arrogant, he was reckless, and he was jeopardizing the very SEALs he commanded. Ava entered the hangar, where a team of operators were conducting a night drill briefing. The room smelled of engine oil, gunpowder residue, and the faint tang of adrenaline. She moved between the men, quietly observing, making mental notes of their positions, reactions, and readiness. The SEALs respected efficiency, and she could feel their curiosity simmering. They had heard rumors of her return, of her past exploits, and some wondered whether she could withstand the harsh, unspoken hierarchy that ruled their world. Colonel Harland appeared moments later, his shadow falling across the floor like a storm. He had noticed Ava reviewing the manifest, and his temper, already simmering, was now approaching a boil. "Lieutenant Commander," he barked, the sound echoing off the hangar walls. "I've told you before, this is my operation. You don't get to rewrite the rules." His eyes burned with controlled fury. Ava didn't flinch. "Sir," she replied evenly, "I'm not rewriting anything. I'm ensuring nothing goes wrong. Our people's lives depend on it." The tension was electric. Harland stepped closer, towering over her with the weight of authority that demanded compliance. "Do you think you're smarter than me?" He spat, voice tight with anger. Ava met his gaze, unyielding. "No, sir. I think I'm accountable." The room froze. SEALs exchanged glances. None had witnessed such direct defiance from a subordinate, let alone a woman. Harland's face twisted, his pride pierced. "You're undermining my command," he shouted, his hands gesturing violently. Ava tried to step back, creating distance, but the colonel advanced, blocking her path. "I won't be told what to do by anyone. Not by you, not by anyone." In a flash, Harland grabbed her by the hair, yanking her backward with raw, unrestrained force. Pain shot through Ava's scalp, but she had trained for situations far deadlier than this. Her mind went into controlled reflex mode. Years of combat training, Krav Maga, and operational discipline kicked in. She twisted her body, leveraging his weight against him, and in a fluid motion, executed a controlled takedown that sent the colonel crashing onto the concrete floor. The room erupted in stunned silence. SEAL operators froze mid-breath, eyes wide in disbelief. No one moved. Chief Miller, standing near the doorway, had his hand hovering over his radio, unsure whether to intervene or let the moment speak for itself. Harland groaned, stunned, brushing dust from his uniform, his expression a mixture of rage and humiliation. "You assaulted me," he stammered, trying to regain authority while lying flat on the cold floor. Ava stepped forward, her boots clicking against the hangar's floor. She didn't shout. She didn't taunt. She simply stood tall, breathing evenly, her eyes locking on Harlan's with a steady, unflinching gaze. "No, sir," she said calmly, her voice carrying the weight of authority and truth. "You assaulted me. I defended myself." The room seemed to shrink around her words. One by one, operators in the hangar began to murmur. Some instinctively moved closer to witness the aftermath. Others exchanged looks of quiet respect. In the SEAL world, physical dominance often spoke louder than words. But Ava's controlled response, measured, precise, and decisive, was something different. It was command without intimidation, strength without cruelty, and decisiveness without hesitation. Harlan tried to rise, but pain and pride kept him on the floor. You'll pay for this," he growled, teeth clenched. Ava didn't answer. Instead, she walked to a nearby table, picking up a clipboard with training manifests. She flipped through it with calm precision, her presence dominating the hangar, her composure unwavering. The message was clear. Fear did not command her. Skill, strategy, and courage did. Chief Miller finally stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Ava's shoulder. "That's enough," he said, his deep voice carrying authority even over Harlan's angry growls. She acted in self-defense. End of discussion. The SEALs in the room, once tense and uncertain, now exhaled collectively. The air shifted. Something unspoken had been acknowledged. Ava Callahan was not someone to be bullied, ignored, or underestimated. Harlan staggered to his feet, red-faced, glaring at Ava as though she had just rewritten the rules of reality itself. "This isn't over," he hissed, his voice barely audible over the hum of the hangar. Ava turned away, unfazed. "No, Colonel. It's just begun," she said under her breath, her tone carrying both warning and calm assurance. Later, when the adrenaline subsided, Ava walked to the edge of the hangar, watching the sun dip behind the horizon. She knew that the incident would ripple far beyond this hangar. Whispers would turn into reports, reports into investigations. Some would see her as a hero, others as a provocateur. But she did not regret her actions. She had followed the principles that had guided her entire career: integrity, courage, and calculated decisiveness. Meanwhile, Harlan retreated to his office, nursing bruised ego and pride. For the first time, he realized that his reputation and rank alone were not enough to command compliance, not with Ava Callahan. Somewhere deep in the corridors of power, the storm had begun, and the entire base would soon feel its effects. That night, Ava's quarters were quiet, except for the faint hum of air conditioning and distant helicopters. She reviewed her notes, documenting the incident carefully, knowing it would be questioned, dissected, and scrutinized. Every SEAL knew the unspoken rule. Respect was earned in action, not demanded by position. Ava had proven it in the most visceral way possible. Chief Miller visited her briefly, his expression a mix of admiration and concern. "You didn't just defend yourself," he said quietly. "You showed them all what leadership really looks like." Ava nodded, exhaustion tugging at her bones. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt focused, knowing that this was only the beginning of a longer, more dangerous fight, one that would test her limits, her patience, and her principles. In the shadows of Coronado, under the fading light of a setting sun, Ava Callahan stood as a solitary figure of calm defiance. The colonel had underestimated her. The SEAL base had underestimated her. But soon, everyone would realize that she wasn't just an officer. She was a force, precise, fearless, and unstoppable. By dawn, Naval Amphibious Base Coronado was alive with murmurs, whispers that snaked through the corridors like wildfire. Lieutenant Commander Ava Callahan had spent the previous evening documenting every detail of the confrontation with Colonel Harland. Her meticulous notes included timelines, precise dialogue, witness names, and even physical evidence, the scuff marks on the hangar floor and the minor abrasions on her scalp. She understood that in the world of military hierarchy, facts alone rarely mattered. Perception often dictated outcomes. And in this case, perception could be deadly. The NCI's team arrived mid-morning, their black SUVs pulling onto the tarmac with quiet authority. Investigators moved with efficiency, taking statements from SEAL operators and base personnel. Every eye seemed to watch Ava, analyzing her calm composure. She was aware that the weight of her actions, defending herself against a superior officer, could either elevate her reputation or destroy her career. Yet she carried herself with unwavering poise, knowing that panic or anger would only undermine her credibility. Colonel Harland, predictably, painted himself as the victim. In a private statement to investigators, he described Ava's actions as an unprovoked attack, framing her as insubordinate and dangerous. She lacks respect for the chain of command, he asserted. But his words lacked the subtlety to mask his own aggressive behavior, and Ava's prior documentation, paired with witness accounts, began to tell a different story. Chief Miller emerged as Ava's silent ally. He provided internal communications and schedules, showing inconsistencies that supported her claim of self-defense. She didn't escalate, Miller said quietly to investigators. He did. Anyone who saw it knows that. His credibility as a decorated veteran lent weight to Ava's position, but the culture of hierarchy on the base meant that even truth could be twisted. Ava understood the stakes. The SEALs could be forced to take sides, and their loyalty might cost careers. Witnesses were interviewed one by one. Some spoke openly about the colonel's temper, noting his history of verbal intimidation and aggressive behavior. Others, fearful of reprisal, provided statements cautiously, carefully avoiding any language that could be construed as insubordination. Ava watched silently, noting body language, tone, and hesitation. She had spent years learning that in situations like this, the unsaid often spoke louder than the words. The most crucial evidence came unexpectedly. A small training drone, used for aerial observation during exercises, had recorded the tail end of the confrontation. The footage showed Harland advancing aggressively toward Ava, grabbing her hair and forcing her backward. Her reflexive defense, the takedown, and his stunned fall were captured in stark detail. For the first time, Ava allowed herself a quiet exhale. The evidence was undeniable. Despite the clear proof, the political stakes were enormous. The Navy's upper echelons were aware that a high-ranking colonel had been publicly challenged and physically subdued by a subordinate. Many questioned whether this would set a dangerous precedent. But Ava didn't flinch. She knew that courage wasn't about approval. It was about standing firm in the face of injustice. The NCIS investigators spent long hours cross-checking statements with operational logs, security footage, and personnel records. Ava remained in the room, silently observing, answering questions calmly. "I did not initiate contact," she repeated steadily when asked. "I only defended myself." Every SEAL here knows that discipline and accountability are paramount. If someone's actions threaten that, they must be addressed. Her clarity and precision left no room for doubt, and yet, she understood that the colonel's network of influence could still complicate matters. Harland, meanwhile, grew increasingly desperate. His face was pale, his hands trembling with frustration. He had spent decades building a reputation as untouchable, and now it was crumbling. He attempted to sway witnesses, argue procedural technicalities, and even hint at Ava's unfit temperament, but the evidence and witness statements were overwhelming. Every attempt to undermine her credibility only highlighted his own failings. Outside the formal investigation rooms, the SEALs watched quietly. Many had never witnessed such a direct challenge to authority. Some feared reprisal. Others quietly admired Ava's courage. Conversations were hushed, acknowledging that she had done what few could, confront both physical aggression and institutional arrogance with dignity and precision. Chief Miller, observing the quiet shifts in morale, noted, "She's changing the culture, whether they like it or not." By late afternoon, Ava returned to her quarters, exhausted but unbroken. The weight of scrutiny pressed heavily, but she focused on the facts. Every detail mattered, every statement could be challenged, and every move had to be calculated. She was navigating a minefield of military bureaucracy and human ego, and she did so with the poise of someone who had faced life-and-death situations in far more dangerous environments. As night fell, the base settled into a tense quiet. Harland retreated to his office, surrounded by officers loyal to his legacy, trying to salvage what remained of his reputation. Ava, alone in her quarters, reflected on the events. She had stood her ground, defended herself, and maintained her integrity. But the fight was far from over. A larger reckoning was coming, one that would involve legal scrutiny, political maneuvering, and the judgment of an entire SEAL community. Ava reviewed the drone footage again, frame by frame, ensuring she had every detail recorded accurately. She wrote detailed annotations, preparing for the inevitable court-martial. Every movement, every gesture, every word mattered. This was no longer about a single incident. It was about ensuring that justice and accountability could survive even in a hierarchy dominated by fear, pride, and long-standing authority. Late into the night, Chief Miller stopped by. "You did what most of us only dream of," he said quietly, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "You stood up. And now, they'll all have to reckon with it." Ava nodded, her mind already anticipating the next stage, the court-martial, where truth would meet politics and courage would face intimidation. She finally lay down, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of helicopters and the whisper of the ocean. The base was tense, charged, waiting. Somewhere in the command chain, a storm was brewing. Harland had underestimated her once. The Navy would soon see that Lieutenant Commander Ava Callahan was not just a capable officer. She was a force. Unwavering, meticulous, and unafraid to confront injustice, no matter how powerful the opposition. And in the stillness of that night, a quiet thought settled in her mind. She hadn't acted for recognition or approval. She had acted because it was the right thing to do, and she was willing to face whatever consequences came next. The courthouse on Naval Base Coronado was unusually silent that morning. Outside, uniformed officers and journalists gathered, their murmurs carrying rumors that would ripple across the Navy. Inside, Lieutenant Commander Ava Callahan walked steadily down the aisle, her boots echoing against polished floors. Each step was deliberate, each movement a quiet declaration. She would not shrink, she would not falter. This was more than a trial, it was a reckoning, not just for her, but for the culture that had tolerated unchecked authority for decades. Colonel Harland entered moments later, flanked by lawyers and aides, his face a mask of controlled rage. Years of ego and prestige rested heavily on his broad shoulders. He had painted Ava as insubordinate, reckless, and dangerously aggressive in his statements to the NCIS. But the reality, captured on drone footage and corroborated by multiple witnesses, told a different story. His challenge was to sway the court with rhetoric and reputation, while Ava would rely solely on truth, discipline, and evidence. The judge called the court to order. Harland's lawyers opened with a forceful narrative. A decorated officer attacked by a subordinate, jeopardizing military order. Their words were polished, rehearsed, and designed to evoke fear of precedent. This is about maintaining respect for the chain of command, they argued. Without discipline, our operations crumble. They paused, letting the words hang, heavy in the air. The room waited. When it was Ava's turn, she rose slowly. Her uniform was immaculate, her demeanor calm but authoritative. She spoke with quiet conviction. "Respect," she began, "cannot exist where fear rules. Discipline is not measured by intimidation, nor is courage proven by silencing those who speak truth." Her words struck a chord with the audience. Even the judge leaned forward, taking in her measured tone, the controlled cadence of someone who had faced death and emerged unshaken. Then the evidence was presented. First came the drone footage clear, unambiguous proof of Harlan's aggression. The hanger, the yanked hair, the takedown, all visible in stark detail. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Even some of Harlan's staunch supporters could not deny what they saw. The footage told a story no rhetoric could overwrite. Ava had been attacked, and she had defended herself with precision, skill, and restraint. Witnesses followed. Chief Miller described the colonel's behavior with subtle authority, carefully framing the truth without seeming accusatory. "I have served under him for years," he said. "I have seen officers bend under pressure, but this was different." She acted decisively, with no malice. Only defense. Other SEALs, who had initially been hesitant, provided corroborating statements about Harlan's history of intimidation and Ava's professional conduct. The courtroom atmosphere shifted. The tide was turning. Harlan's defense grew frantic. He tried procedural arguments, questioned witness credibility, and hinted at Ava's temperament as unfit for leadership. But each attack was systematically dismantled by Ava's counsel, a retired JAG officer whose knowledge of military law and court procedure was unmatched. Every document, every log, every testimony reinforced one undeniable truth. Ava's actions were justified, her professionalism impeccable, and the colonel's behavior unacceptable. At the climax of the trial, the judge allowed Ava to speak directly. She rose, steady and unwavering. "I did not act out of anger or rebellion," she said. "I acted to protect myself and maintain the integrity of command. Leadership is not about fear, coercion, or the illusion of untouchable authority. It is about accountability, courage, and protecting those under your charge. This is what I defended that day." The room was silent. Even seasoned officers, trained to control reactions under stress, felt the weight of her words. Harlan's face paled. His carefully constructed narrative was crumbling before him, eroded by evidence, testimony, and the undeniable authority of truth. He realized that the SEALs, the court, and even the broader Navy would not overlook his aggression. Years of control, dominance, and intimidation had finally met someone whose strength was calm, calculated, and unshakable. After hours of deliberation, the verdict was delivered. Ava Callahan was cleared of all charges. The judge's statement was firm, emphasizing self-defense, professional conduct, and the undue aggression of the colonel. Harlan was relieved of duty, facing disciplinary action and pending investigation into his conduct. A hush fell over the courtroom as the weight of accountability settled over everyone present. Outside the courthouse, SEALs and officers whispered among themselves. Some were awed, others cautious. The balance of power on the base had shifted irreversibly. Ava's composure had not only defended her life and career, but had begun to redefine respect, authority, and accountability within the elite ranks of the SEALs. Chief Miller caught up with her in the parking lot. "You've done what few could," he said quietly, his voice a mix of awe and relief. "You've proven that integrity matters more than rank, and courage more than fear." Ava nodded, exhausted but resolute. "It wasn't for recognition," she replied softly. It was for justice, for every SEAL who's ever been silenced or threatened by unchecked authority. Later, back at her quarters, Ava reflected on the day's events. The court-martial had tested not only her resilience, but the very structure of military power. It had been a battle of evidence, nerves, and principle. And she had won not with intimidation, not with brute force, but with poise, precision, and truth. The victory was not just personal. It was symbolic. It sent a message across the base and beyond. Respect must be earned, authority must be just, and no one, regardless of rank, was beyond accountability. Ava knew that the journey was far from over. The Navy's political currents were complex, and Harlan's supporters might seek revenge or obstruction. But for now, she had reclaimed her dignity and reaffirmed the principles she had lived by her entire career. Courage is the measure of leadership, and truth is its foundation. As night fell over Coronado, Ava stood by the window of her quarters, looking at the ocean horizon. Helicopters hummed faintly in the distance. Waves crashed against the shore, and the wind whispered a promise of change. The base had witnessed something unprecedented, not just a clash of egos, but a demonstration of unwavering resolve, courage, and justice. She whispered to herself, a quiet vow for the days ahead. This is just the beginning. The morning after the court-martial, Naval Amphibious Base Coronado felt different, charged, almost electric. Lieutenant Commander Ava Callahan walked the familiar corridors, noting the subtle shifts in demeanor around her. Officers and SEALs alike whispered quietly, some casting furtive glances, others staring openly with a mixture of awe and newfound respect. The base had witnessed the fall of a commanding officer's unchecked authority, and the seismic shift reverberated through every office, barrack, and training field. Chief Miller intercepted her near the operations office, his expression betraying both relief and cautious optimism. "They're still talking about yesterday," he said quietly, leaning closer. "Harlan's supporters are in shock. Some are embarrassed. Some are angry. But no one can deny what happened." Ava nodded, her calm exterior unbroken. She had anticipated these reactions. She understood that her victory, while decisive, would ripple through the base in unpredictable ways. The SEALs, who had once looked at her with skepticism, now approached differently. In small groups, they shared private nods and subtle acknowledgments of respect. A few officers whispered words of support in hallways, cautious not to overstep. Their eyes told stories unspoken, recognition, admiration, and a hint of relief that someone had challenged the status quo without compromising discipline. For many, Ava had become a symbol, a demonstration that courage, integrity, and calm decisiveness were more powerful than intimidation or rank. Even Harlan's allies had to adjust. Some retreated into silence, avoiding direct interaction with Ava. Others attempted subtle digs, testing whether her composure would falter. But she remained unshaken. Her approach was deliberate, professionalism above all else, strength through consistency, and an unspoken command of presence that made defiance seem futile. She knew the aftermath would be long, that residual tension could linger for months, even years, but she was prepared for the slow work of recalibration. The aftermath extended beyond personal interactions. Command protocols began to shift subtly. The officers responsible for oversight and accountability were more attentive. The chain of command had been reminded that leadership required more than ego and intimidation. Training sessions now included not only physical and tactical preparation, but also communication and respect assessments. Ava's influence was quietly, but undeniably reshaping the base's culture. During a midday inspection, Ava walked past SEALs running through the obstacle course. Some glanced up, offering nods of recognition or silent respect. One young operative, barely out of the SEAL pipeline, paused and whispered to a colleague, "She's the real deal." No one's going to mess with her. Ava didn't respond. She merely noted the morale boost. Leadership, she knew, wasn't about accolades. It was about the quiet assurance that competence, integrity, and courage could survive and thrive, even under pressure. The colonel, meanwhile, had retreated from public view. Harlan's removal from command was official, but the shadow of his presence lingered like a storm cloud. Some officers still defended his reputation quietly, while others reconsidered their loyalty. Rumors circulated, but Ava did not engage in politics or debate. She allowed her actions to speak, understanding that the true measure of her leadership would be revealed not in gossip, but in consistent performance and the respect she earned. That evening, Chief Miller approached her in the gym, where she had been quietly reviewing operational schedules. "You've changed the entire atmosphere on this base," he said, leaning against the wall. "People are watching, talking, and most importantly, thinking. They're learning something rare, that integrity can't be intimidated." Ava nodded. "It's not about teaching them," she replied softly. "It's about showing them that leadership isn't a title. It's behavior, and behavior must be earned every single day." Even among the younger recruits, the shift was palpable. They observed her not as a figure of fear, nor as an unreachable authority, but as someone whose competence demanded respect. Many started modeling their behavior on her example. Calm, measured, yet assertive. SEAL culture, traditionally resistant to change, was adapting subtly but significantly to a new paradigm where courage, discipline, and accountability outweighed hierarchy and ego. As night fell, Ava returned to her quarters, her thoughts circling the events of the past days. She reviewed logs, schedules, and reports, ensuring that the operational effectiveness of the base remained uncompromised. The incident with Harlan had not only tested her skill and resolve, but had forced the entire SEAL community to confront uncomfortable truths about authority, intimidation, and respect. She knew that the journey was far from over. Residual tensions and latent grudges would need careful navigation. Yet there was a sense of quiet triumph. The SEALs were beginning to see a new standard, one where accountability could coexist with courage, and integrity could exist alongside operational excellence. Ava had not sought notoriety, but she had delivered a lesson more powerful than any drill or training exercise. Courage and competence could challenge even the highest ranks when applied with precision, patience, and principle. Chief Miller, ever vigilant, reminded her gently, "Change is slow, Ava, but you've started a ripple that won't fade easily. The base will remember what happened here." Ava's gaze lingered on the horizon visible from her quarters, the Pacific reflecting the last streaks of sunlight. "It's not about memory," she said softly. "It's about ensuring the right path is clear for everyone who follows. If they learn that, the mission, the team, and the integrity of the SEALs are all stronger." Even as the base settled into a tentative calm, Ava knew that challenges remained. Harlan's shadow might still influence decisions, and political pressure from higher command could shift unpredictably. But for now, she had turned the tide. Respect had been reaffirmed, authority had been properly calibrated, and the SEALs, both seasoned operators and new recruits, were learning the value of integrity and courage in practice, not just theory. That night, Ava stood on the balcony of her quarters, looking out over the water. The waves crashed rhythmically against the shore, relentless and indifferent, yet somehow inspiring in their constancy. She reflected on the past weeks, the tension, the confrontation, the court-martial, and now the aftershock. Each step had been a test of skill, patience, and moral resolve. And she had passed not through force or intimidation, but through clarity, courage, and unshakable principle. Somewhere in the corridors of Coronado, the SEALs whispered about her quietly, admiration, respect, and cautious wonder in their voices. Leadership, they were beginning to understand, could be earned through example, through steadfastness, and through the courage to confront even the most formidable opposition. Ava Callahan had done exactly that. And as the wind carried the faint sound of distant helicopters across the base, Ava allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She had survived the storm, navigated the aftermath, and begun to reshape the culture of one of the most elite military units in the world. The base was changed forever, and so was she. But she knew the mission wasn't over. The coming months would test not only her leadership, but the resilience, courage, and loyalty of every SEAL who called Coronado home. 2 weeks after the court-martial, Naval Amphibious Base Coronado had settled into a tense equilibrium. Lieutenant Commander Ava Callahan had not only survived the political storm, but had begun to shape a culture of accountability and respect. Yet the true test of leadership, she knew, would not come from paperwork, protocol, or internal politics. It would come from the field. The call came early that morning. An urgent intelligence briefing. A hostile cell operating along the U.S. Pacific coastline had been tracking sensitive military operations. Their activity threatened national security and required immediate intervention. The operation, designated Silent Wave, was to be covert, precise, and high stakes. Ava was appointed to lead the mission. For the first time, the SEALs she had earned the trust of would see her not only as a symbol of authority, but as the commanding officer responsible for their lives. In the command center, Ava reviewed satellite imagery, reconnaissance data, and personnel reports. She traced enemy movements, identified vulnerabilities, and created a strategy that leveraged every advantage while minimizing risk. Unlike many officers who relied on intimidation to inspire compliance, Ava's approach was meticulous, logical, and calculated. Every SEAL on her team knew their role, their backup, and the contingencies for every possible scenario. Precision was not optional. It was survival. Her team gathered in the briefing room, tension and anticipation coiling through the air like static electricity. "Listen up," Ava began, her voice calm but authoritative. "Our objective is to infiltrate the facility undetected, secure the intelligence, and extract without alerting the cell. Timing is everything. Hesitation costs lives. Execution must be flawless." The SEALs nodded, their eyes focused on her with unwavering attention. They trusted her, not because of rank, but because she had proven she could lead with clarity, courage, and competence. The journey to the target was a tense sequence of precision maneuvers. The SEALs navigated coastal waters in silenced craft, avoiding patrols and surveillance drones. Ava coordinated every move via encrypted communication, her calm voice guiding the team through narrow straits, hidden coves, and potential ambush points. The team moved like shadows under her command, silent, lethal, and synchronized. Upon arrival, the team encountered unexpected resistance. Sensors and alarms had been triggered by an enemy drone, and a patrol was approaching faster than anticipated. Ava's response was immediate. She directed her team to take cover, coordinated suppressive measures, and calculated the timing for a precise takedown. Every movement was deliberate, efficient, and lethal when necessary. Her earlier trials had not only proven her resilience, but honed her ability to remain calm under extreme pressure, the difference between success and catastrophe. The takedown was executed with flawless timing. SEALs neutralized the patrol quietly, avoiding detection by the main facility. Ava led the team through narrow corridors, her presence commanding yet unobtrusive. She provided guidance and support, correcting errors instantly and reinforcing the discipline she had cultivated over weeks of careful leadership. The facility's intelligence center loomed ahead, and she ensured every team member understood the extraction plan and contingencies. Inside the facility, Ava moved with surgical precision. Security systems were bypassed, files and devices secured, and every footprint minimized. The intelligence gathered was critical, documents detailing future operations, communications, and strategic plans. Failure was not an option, and Ava's leadership ensured that no mistakes were made. Even under pressure, her team moved like extensions of her strategic mind. Suddenly, an unexpected alarm triggered. The enemy had discovered a delayed sensor Ava hadn't accounted for. Within moments, guards converged on their location. Ava's voice cut through the tension like steel. Defensive positions. Hold your sectors. Wait for my mark. Her instructions were concise, precise, and commanding. The SEALs responded instantly, holding the perimeter, neutralizing threats with minimal noise and maximum efficiency. Ava moved to reinforce critical positions, her tactical awareness and calm decisiveness preventing the situation from spiraling into chaos. As the team prepared for extraction, Ava identified a new risk. A secondary exit had been compromised. Without hesitation, she recalculated the route, rerouted personnel, and synchronized extraction with pinpoint timing. Her calm under pressure reassured the team. Even in moments of uncertainty, her presence was a stabilizing force. The SEALs executed the new plan flawlessly, moving through narrow corridors and back to the shoreline with stealth and precision. During extraction, a minor misstep caused one operator to nearly trigger an alarm. Ava acted instantly, using hand signals and tactical commands to prevent detection. The team reached the craft, and they disappeared into the night waters, silent and undetected. Adrenaline coursed through every SEAL, but they moved with practiced efficiency, guided by Ava's meticulous planning and steady leadership. Back at Coronado, the team debriefed. The operation had been a resounding success. Intelligence secured, minimal exposure, no casualties. The SEALs were energized and visibly relieved. They recognized that their lives had been incompetent, calculated hands, and that trust, earned through actions rather than authority, was their greatest weapon. Ava's leadership had transformed potential chaos into flawless execution. Chief Miller approached Ava quietly after the debriefing. "They followed you without hesitation," he said, pride evident in his tone. Not everyone could inspire that level of trust after what happened with Harland. Ava shook her head slightly, still processing the adrenaline and responsibility. "It's not about me," she said softly. "It's about ensuring everyone knows the plan, trusts each other, and acts with discipline. That's how we survive and succeed." Even in victory, Ava remained vigilant. She knew the SEAL community would observe this operation closely, analyzing every decision, every risk, and every outcome. The success of Silent Wave had not only reinforced her authority, but had elevated the standard for leadership across the base. Competence, courage, and calm decisiveness had triumphed over fear, intimidation, and ego. That night, standing on the balcony of her quarters, Ava gazed at the horizon. The operation had tested her leadership, her tactical skills, and her ability to inspire trust under extreme pressure. The SEALs she had led would remember this night, not as a demonstration of her rank, but as proof that integrity, courage, and precision could overcome the most dangerous and unpredictable circumstances. In the quiet of Coronado, the waves whispered their eternal rhythm. Ava understood that while this mission was complete, her work was far from over. Leadership was an ongoing challenge, and the SEALs, now looking to her not only for orders but for guidance, would demand consistency, courage, and unflinching clarity. She had proven herself in confrontation, in court, and in operation. The next chapter would test her endurance, her wisdom, and the bonds she had forged, but for now, she allowed herself a rare moment of quiet satisfaction. The base had seen a storm, endured the aftermath, and now witnessed the calm mastery of a leader who had earned every measure of respect. Ava Callahan's name would not just be remembered, it would become a benchmark, a standard, and a symbol of what it truly meant to lead. Weeks had passed since Operation Silent Wave, and life on Naval Amphibious Base Coronado had settled into a new rhythm. The SEALs moved with a heightened sense of discipline, awareness, and respect, not just for rules, but for each other. Lieutenant Commander Eva Callahan walked among them quietly, observing, noting subtle changes in behavior, and appreciating the small victories that came from shaping culture one decision at a time. The court-martial and subsequent events had altered the power dynamics of the base. Colonel Harland was no longer a looming presence, and his removal sent a clear message. Authority is meaningless without integrity, and intimidation has no place in leadership. Officers and enlisted personnel alike began to reevaluate how they treated one another, how they exercised command, and how courage was measured. Eva's actions, once controversial, had become a model of disciplined courage. Her influence extended beyond morale. Training schedules were revised to emphasize teamwork, communication, and ethical decision-making alongside physical and tactical skills. Eva personally oversaw exercises, guiding the SEALs with a blend of experience, intuition, and quiet authority. She understood that leadership wasn't about accolades or fear. It was about consistency, fairness, and earning the trust of those you led. One morning, she observed a group of young recruits running a simulated operation. They communicated flawlessly, moved with precision, and executed tasks without hesitation. Watching them, Eva recognized the subtle but profound impact her leadership had on their development. She remembered her own early days, the intimidation, the testing, the moments when she had doubted herself, and knew she was giving them something far more valuable than drills: confidence grounded in competence, and respect grounded in integrity. Chief Miller approached her during the break, leaning against the training obstacle. "You've done more than change procedures," he said. "You've changed minds, and that's harder than any mission." Eva gave a small, thoughtful nod. "It's not about changing minds," she replied. "It's about showing what leadership looks like in action. People learn by observing, not by being told. That's what lasts." The base, once tense with whispered fear and unspoken rivalries, now carried a different energy. Operators sought guidance rather than dominance. Cooperation replaced fear, and discipline was reinforced by understanding, not intimidation. Eva's leadership had created a culture where courage was measured by integrity and skill, not by rank or aggression. The ripple effects extended beyond her immediate team. Even senior officers who had once doubted her approach were beginning to adjust, realizing that results, accountability, and respect could coexist. Outside the base, Eva's reputation quietly grew. Word of her decisive actions, both during the confrontation with Harland and the success of Operation Silent Wave, spread through military channels. She became a symbol of what leadership could achieve when grounded in courage, clarity, and calm decisiveness. Younger officers sought her mentorship, and her guidance was valued not because of her rank, but because of the results and integrity she consistently demonstrated. Despite the accolades and quiet recognition, Eva remained humble. She focused not on her own legacy, but on the mission, the team, and the broader principles that guided her actions. Each day, she reviewed plans, mentored new SEALs, and ensured operational readiness. Her personal victories had become the foundation for a stronger, more cohesive unit, a unit capable of extraordinary feats, guided by discipline and trust. One evening, as the sun dipped into the Pacific, Eva stood on the balcony of her quarters, reflecting on the journey. The confrontation with Harland had been more than a personal trial. It had tested her judgment, resilience, and ethical convictions. The court-martial had been a proving ground for integrity under scrutiny. Operation Silent Wave had demonstrated her leadership in practice, where lives and national security hung in the balance. And now, in the quiet aftermath, she could see the lasting impact of those moments on the SEAL community. Her thoughts turned to the SEALs she had led, the ones who had initially doubted, questioned, or feared her authority. Now they followed not because they had to, but because they wanted to, a subtle but profound transformation that Ava understood as the truest measure of leadership. Respect, earned through courage, competence, and fairness, had replaced fear, and it was stronger for it. Chief Miller appeared at her side, the twilight reflecting in his eyes. "You've left a mark here," he said softly. "Not just in procedures or operations, but in hearts and minds. They'll remember this, and they'll follow your example long after you're gone." Ava smiled faintly, feeling the weight of the truth in his words. "That's all I ever wanted," she said. "Not to be remembered for one act, but to set a standard. If even a few understand that, then everything was worth it." The SEALs continued to train in the distance, their movements precise and coordinated. Ava watched, recognizing that the foundation she had laid was more enduring than any single victory or mission. Courage, integrity, and discipline were not temporary. They were cultivated, practiced, and passed down. The base had been through turbulence, confrontation, and challenge, and now it stood resilient, stronger, and wiser. In the quiet of the evening, Ava allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She thought about the moments of fear, the tests of resolve, and the small victories that had led to this point. The confrontation with Harland, the court-martial, the operation, all had been trials of courage and character. And through them, she had learned that leadership was never about power or ego. It was about vision, integrity, and the courage to act when it mattered most. As night fell over Coronado, the Pacific shimmered beneath the stars, and Ava felt a sense of calm fulfillment. Her journey had been arduous, filled with conflict, risk, and challenge. Yet it had also revealed the profound truth that courage and integrity, when applied consistently, could reshape even the most rigid hierarchies, inspire loyalty, and cultivate respect. She had faced the storm, navigated the aftermath, led with precision, and left a lasting impact, not just as a commander, but as a leader of principle. And in the stillness of that night, with the base quiet and the waves whispering along the shore, Ava Callahan understood something essential. Leadership was not about glory, recognition, or fear. It was about leaving a legacy of courage, integrity, and unwavering commitment, a legacy that would endure far longer than any single rank, mission, or confrontation. She whispered to herself softly, a final affirmation of the journey she had endured. Strength is proven not in the fight, but in the calm after it. Integrity is measured not by fear, but by respect earned. And courage is the legacy we leave behind. With that, Ava turned from the balcony and walked back into the base, ready for whatever challenges awaited next. The SEALs, the missions, and the future were all part of the work she had begun. A work grounded in principle, guided by courage, and destined to endure.